Women today are inundated with expectations about having a full and satisfying career, wanting to be available and attentive and have a complete family life, having a fulfilling and satisfying marriage. And yet the pace of our lives, the expectations in every single one of these areas are completely overwhelming and probably unrealistic. When my two children were very young, I had my daughter and son 18 months apart, and we moved to England for my husband to be in graduate school. And I was still working part-time at a startup that I had begun. And that was a season where I really started to feel the limitations of not being able to do everything as well or as fully as I was wanting to. I felt like I wasn't able to give my children and my marriage the attention that they wanted, and at the same time I wasn't able to give clients what they needed. And that was a critical crisis moment for me to really lean in and insist that the gospel offer a more sufficient answer for me. 62% of mothers say they are dissatisfied with the balance they have between their work and home life. 72% of women say they have too much stress in their life. More than half of all moms say they are overcommitted. Only 26% of women say they are extremely satisfied with their life. I had read a lot of resources on work-life balance and how to think about being a woman and a career woman and a woman who had children, and it all felt very logistical to me. It all felt like it was really about, it came down to arrangements and situations and circumstances and whether or not you could afford certain things or not afford certain things, whether it was you could afford the time or financially. And I felt like that wasn't really complicated. It was complicated logistically, but it didn't really make sense of the deeper question that I had, which was it okay to pursue all of these things at once? Was there a way to hold them together coherently? And it was the incarnation that really came alive to me in this circumstance, where I realized as what I was battling with more than situations and arrangements and commitments was limitation. That's what my frustration was. And in the incarnation, what I was able to see is that God, who has all wisdom and opportunity and resource at his disposal, chose to come down and take on constraints, and that he chose to do his own work in the world in the context of constraints. And that became very freeing for me as I tried to navigate a coherent life in the midst of my own limitations. So specific constraints that I find I contend with as a mother with little kids are physical constraints. So it's exhaustion, it's pregnancy and nursing and not sleeping enough. It's also time. It's constraints of circumstances, finances, or relationships. We're friends with the people we're friends with, or we're part of the church that we're part of, or we're married to the person we're married to. And all of those people and places are imperfect, and they place expectations and limitations on our life. And yet those are the things that God is asking us to live our lives within the context of. He's asking us to live our lives in the context of constraint, and we can't avoid them. And so we have to look to the gospel to find a better answer. Often women will talk about having it all or not having it all, or whatever it all refers to. It's sort of implied that we all know what that means: career and family and marriage and friends and looking good and having a great house, or however that gets defined. And I think part of the challenge is really doing the harder work of figuring out not so much that we need to be consumers in our lives, getting a bunch of stuff so then we can have it, but instead asking the question of belonging. What are the things that God is asking me to give myself to and to belong to? You need community. You need people who can look in on your life from the outside and challenge you, push you, ask questions if it seems like you're going down a direction, a road that isn't helpful and it's not yielding anything. It's going to be your community. It's going to be people around you, your spouse or your friends, who can wave the flag and say, this may not be the thing God's asking you to do because it seems like it's asking too much of you. But I think the question is, what is it that we're leaning into? And I would say leaning in more fully, insisting that the Lord wants our stewardship to be radical and he wants it to be full, but he doesn't want it to be frenetic. He doesn't want it to be the end of us. And so stepping more fully into this mystery of how is it that the Lord is inviting us uniquely as women to step in the role of motherhood in particular, as well as other gifts and the fullness of skills and abilities. Not that the burden would be crushing, but that the burden would be light. And at the end, we would find ourselves flourishing rather than burning out.